The Voice Teacher Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Voice Teacher Podcast. I'm Sam Johnson, and I'm joined with Amy Geddes and our special guest, Richard Lissemore. Clap, 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 clap. Jazz hands.
Amy, I think you just threw the sound out of whack. What happened?
Sorry, I was trying to cheer for you here.
Okay, it's very high frequency.
Well, that's your specialty, isn't it?
Definitely.
Beautiful segue. So, what got you into being a voice teacher?
First of all, thank you for having me on the Tonight Show. I wanted to be on with Johnny Carson, but I missed it by a few years. I think he's dead, isn't he? I mean, I really missed it.
I think he retired in 1992.
Oh, retired from the show or retired from life?
The show ended in 1992.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
All right. So as we were saying before everybody came on here, see all the books behind me? This is how you intimidate people into thinking you know really what you're talking about. It's like, actually, there's even more books over there. So it's like,
Oh my goodness.
It's like, yeah. So it's like super intimidation. So I like to do that before we start so everybody feels uncomfortable.
Well, I'm intimidated.
So the
What's
question,
that?
sorry, how did I go into voice teaching? We have to really start with my worst decisions in life. We can't
Correct.
start with something positive.
No. Starting at the bottom. We gotta build things up.
So I think I actually, aside from a student, I think I taught my first student when I was 27. I was, I had my very own first apartment in New York City in 1990. I rented a piano and I literally went around the neighborhood in some places and made little signs, with the little pull-off tabs with your phone number. Yeah, so that's how I started. And then like 3 years after that, later, I got my first job at an institution. It was not a psychiatric institution. That was the second job. So the first one was the American Musical and Dramatic Academy.
So just some background for anyone who doesn't know Richard. Richard has been teaching for a minute now. I think at least a minute, like you said. So 31 years, I guess. And you are a PhD. How close to your PhD are
Well,
you?
my official thing is candidate, right? So
That's what we call it. That's the
a PhD candidate is anybody who's sort of passed their qualifying exams and has done all the way up to the person who's the day before they defend. So that covers an awful lot of ground. And I'm like at the very end. I'm at the very end writing. It's really, I'm sort of in the formality phase. I feel confident I can say that. It's a formality.
And it's in speech science, is that correct?
So it's in speech language hearing science. Typically in that realm, it's those departments are all either speech language hearing science or communication sciences and disorders. Those two names sort of they're like optional names for those departments. So I teach in basically a department that trains speech pathologists and audiologists. That's where it is. But the program itself, the PhD program that I have been in, is not a clinical program. So there are speech pathologists in the program doing PhDs, but there are also linguists and speech scientists and hearing scientists. So like all hearing scientists are not audiologists. Audiology is the clinical correlate of that. So it's a big mixture of, it's a lot of very, very smart people. Don't ask how I got in there.
That's why you have all the books, right?
I'm
To be
bankrupt. Well,
intimidating.
that's those books over there. That's
Oh.
those guys over there. So yeah, behind me is like music. So I'm like still got my like the music hat on. But
Richard has also been my voice teacher for the last few years and has been wonderful, just wonderful.
why did you tell people that? Do you know? It's like I'm going to get hate mail because of this.
Yeah, because they'll listen to me and then be like, "How
They'll be like,
dare-"
exactly. What were you thinking?
I need Richard to be my voice teacher, I think. Because when we
Didn't
came
you write
to
to me once about that, Amy? Didn't
Yes,
you
I
write that to
did.
me?
And then at the time you were not like jazzed about doing online lessons. And then I got all
Isn't that
intimidated.
true? Isn't that true? Look what COVID did to all of us.
Right?
Isn't
We're so
it
good at it now.
unbelievable?
Right? Now that's all I prefer. I'm like, I don't want to see you in person.
Everybody,
You're going to breathe on me.
you know, that's what we should actually talk a little bit about. We should talk about the sort of the efficacy of online lessons. So like what's good and what's not good. That's a really good conversation. This is just an interesting general thing. How we can all develop in life. We think we know who we are. We think we know where we're going, when actually most of the time we don't. So we have these ideas, and listen, I had pretty good reason to feel pretty confident about those ideas. It's not like, oh, I had no idea what I was doing. So good ideas about it, but then you go, oh, it's that whole, man plans and God laughs thing. It's like, you don't know what's going to happen. And look what happened. So what happened was I was, I always saw myself as this in-person guy, right? Like my power, if you will, was in person. And by that, I just mean my sort of emotional power. I'm an in-person kind of guy. Like when I walk in the room, I'm good in the room and I'm good with people. And my work was always mostly Broadway professionals, a small number of kids, small, but usually they were professionals too, or like really close to, or prepping for a college audition, but mostly pros. So it was like that in-person thing was vital. So that's where it was, right? And then, of course, COVID happens. And I felt the same way about my university teaching. So, I teach science courses to speech pathology students. And I always thought I was the classroom guy. I'm the classroom guy. I mean, give me a clicker and a PowerPoint in a big room. And when COVID hit, when COVID hit, I was teaching an anatomy and physiology class with 90 undergrads in a large underground auditorium. The university closed the day before I was giving an in-person midterm exam to 90 students in anatomy and physiology. The students thought this was the greatest thing that ever happened in their entire lives.
Yes.
They did not know this was going to turn into the worst thing that happened to New York in everybody's lifetime. But that night they thought it was oh my God, it was like a permanent snow day. Anatomy and physiology midterms not happening. So what does Lissemore have to do? Spend the next 5 days buried in my computer, figuring out how to change an in-person exam to an online exam for 90 students. All right, so what's great about online teaching? Here's what I learned. What did I learn in 2.5 years? Online teaching technique, vocal technique, a cappella, because it's really the best way it works. That turned out to be a real gift for me as a teacher, as a listener, to hear the purity, to be able to show somebody, for example, just to do something really simple, like if I did, ma, 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 and then to hear a student back go, ma, 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 and to really hear, for really the first time in my life after 30 years, I was really hearing the details of the intonation of every note, that it wasn't this like, ma, 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 which is people get into this mindless thing, and you realize when you go a cappella, you're like, wow, that your intonation's really poor. Hold on, let's fix that. And almost everybody I find fix their intonation quickly and quite accurately and beautifully with just a little bit of nudging, a little attention. All of a sudden, they get real good at the intonation. So it was good for that. But as the listener, it was also really good for you to hear the voice without. To this day, like I have students who are in colleges, and sometimes they'll send their recordings back of a lesson. I'm sure you guys have this too. And they said, and it's just shocking how loudly, the voice teachers on the other end doing this, and you're like, louder. It's like, holy crap. So it's like, wow, they really didn't get the memo on that, right? Whereas I'm like, oh, so that's the first thing that I think I've really learned is this. And for students to really learn to sing with technique over a range, an extended range, right? That 2+ octaves without the support of accompaniment, they start to sing very, very well. And that's now how I make really my living. Isn't that a riot, right? A few years ago, not so into online lessons. I think actually, Amy, I'm not so into you.
You're so rude, Richard.
Wait,
I thought you were amazing.
Amy, it's because I'm a middle-aged gay man. You're misunderstanding. Sam, how come these beautiful women never quite pay attention? What's the problem there?
Next question. Amy, why did you want to take lessons from Richard? How did that even start?
Because Richard helped me hit a note that I'd never before hit in my life. I am dead serious. It was the G6. And I had never done that. And I thought maybe a couple times in college I topped out at an F, but this was like after giving birth to 4 children. Your voice is, not as tiny as it is when you're like 18.
So have you hit a G6 since October
No,
2018?
no, I don't think I've even
Oh
tried.
my.
What song am I going to hit it in? I don't really sing that kind of repertoire.
All right, let's do it right now. Let's go. Here we go.
What am I going to sing? I'm not really warm.
We'll do another time.
Another
But
time. I would love that.
What is do you have any like specific approaches for getting all the way up there? Like what are some of your go-to tools for helping people who you're like, you can definitely get up there, but they don't think it?
Yeah, and how did you
asking? Who's that question for?
That's for Richard.
For you,
But,
Richard, for you.
Yeah, like why, I mean, how did you know that it would go there when you took me there? Obviously, that was 4 years ago. How would you remember?
Well, I think that's a great question. In general, I think that the really good singing teachers sort of, we have principles that we apply, right? And there's so much we try to learn in terms of pedagogy, voice science, all these things, but there's this huge other element to it, right? Which is the human being in front of us and the human being who we are. So this part we're not trained in, right? This sort of intuitive sensibility. What's the sound we're hearing? What's the sound this person's releasing? How easy does it seem to be for them? Right. So I never like race through to the top. It's like, let's just see what happens. Right. And I sort of my general philosophy, and I think a lot of people would sort of probably agree with that or have the same philosophy, is this idea that, the voice, if you apply these principles, the person in front of you and their voice is going to show you. By the way, I believe the person and their human spirit and their voice or their soul, it's all the same thing. And that the voice becomes a problem when it becomes a thing that the human spirit is trying to do, instead of an expression of who the spirit is. And I think that technically becomes an issue. So one of the things I look for is who is this person, right? And who are they? Who are they? We don't even get overly deep about it. It's just people start to just tell you who they are. What's their history? What's this? Then, like, for example, if we started, now I don't remember exactly what we did, Amy, to get there 4 years ago, right? So it's like, but I can, sort of guess, and I'd be like, okay, so there must have been things that was like, and this was in public, right? It wasn't in private. This was in front of 50 people or something. So it's like, I can only assume. So the basic timbre color of the voice was like, okay, so she's a soprano for sure. So when you're listening quickly, you're like, okay, lyric soprano. So it's like this, okay. Lyric, the question now is, well, how high is she? So as we go up, it's like if you have a soprano who's like, flying right up to B flat 5 or C6, that you're like, okay, all's well in the world. How you doing there, Amy? And you're probably like this, great. So if you're great, if you're great and I'm great, what do we do? Proceed. Proceed. And if we come up against a little something that needs a tweak, you might try to tweak. And if they get it, you go, how you feeling there? They're like, great. You're like, great, let's proceed. Whereas if you try a little tweak and it didn't work very well, you might try another tweak, right? And if that doesn't quite go yet, then that's where I'm always big on the school of retreat. Retreat. When I watch a lot of singing teachers work, I'm like, you missed the retreat button, right? You kept proceeding when you probably should have retreated, right? You didn't have a really good bunch of reasons to keep going. You maybe should have stopped and said, let's, for today, for now. And why would it be? It's like this, I don't know why it is. Half the time, the students in front of you, you don't know them that well, right? Maybe you've had a few sessions with them. You don't know the full history, so you wait and see. So how do we get to a G6? So all sorts of things were leading us there, right? So I exhorted you on to the moment. Why? Because you were leading yourself there. It wasn't some, magic potion on my part. You were leading the setup was right too. It's like, if the setup is right, meaning if the middle's not too heavy, if the voice is if the production's not too intense, meaning too perceptually too loud, if the person sounds like they're in a good groove, all's going well. It's like, all's well in the world. Away we go, right? And then, you could have a young mezzo and it's like all of a sudden at B flat 5 at the top, you're like, okay, back down we go. I mean, you can't make something happen. God knows a lot of singing teachers try to. But I don't think it's ever wise because it's unlikely also that the client's going to feel comfortable doing it again. Like Amy, see, I took her to the G6, never did it again. So you see what an effective teacher I am. Very effective.
Very effective.
Yeah, the work stuck. Boom.
Well, I haven't had a reason to go up there, I should say.
Well, let's talk about that for a second.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about that. So why would you, like, for example, if you're not a coloratura soprano who's singing in the opera, right? If you're not going to be singing the Queen of the Night or, you're not going to be singing Olympia and the Tales of Hoffman, or you're not singing a big coloratura role, why would you want to go to G6? Well, the answer to that would be, for me, is if that is part of your anatomical, physiological, spiritual experience of your voice, you should be using it. There's a benefit to using the full range of the voice for people throughout the full lifetime of the person, because it's going to keep the voice flexible, and it's going to give you, right, another time, some people are very familiar with my work on what I call the octave rule, right, which is a general rule about the highest note that women, in particular sopranos, sing in their head voice, right? In this example, C6, is about what you should expect the belt voice to do an octave lower. So your Elphabas in Wicked, who are belting F5s, like Idina Menzel and all these gals, they're all coloratura sopranos. They may have never sung up there, but I'd almost bet my life on it that they're coloratura sopranos. So when people say in Wicked, oh, the Glinda and the Elphaba are completely different voices, I always say, oh, that's interesting. I think they're the same exact voice type. They just both use the voice differently, right? So Glinda's singing in her legit soprano voice, Elphaba's in her belt voice, but Glinda for sure is probably a very, very lyric soprano or soubrette, maybe a lyric coloratura. Elphaba's definitely coloratura if she's belting high, sustained high Fs. You're not going to see this from a mezzo soprano. You're not going to see sustained E's and F's from. So the octave rule is not meant to be an absolute. It's meant to be a guide, especially when you're dealing with younger women, to say, so if I had a younger coloratura soprano, well, why would I want to sing to G6 if I'm never going to use it? The first answer to that is, well, you never know if you're going to use it. We don't know that. Just because somebody hasn't written it yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And you're going to want that, because that's going to have a lot of impact on your high belt voice an octave lower. And that has to do with formants, harmonics. That has a lot to do with that particular routine.
No, I wanted to go back because you said you wanted to go back to this, how I said after having babies, my voice wasn't as tiny. Okay.
Yeah. What do you mean about that? Tell us about that. No, I think, listen, I love the language we use, and I mean that with affection. I do. I think we are so connected to our voices, singers and singing teachers, that we talk about it in these sort of absolutely moronic terms that make perfect sense to us and probably make perfect sense to even each other. And that's what's even crazier about it, right? It's like we use these insane things we say that actually, I dropped the ball, sorry, that mean nothing. So it's like, but you mean something. So the question is, what do you think you meant? And let's see if we can put that in perspective.
Okay, well, you're going to make fun of what I say no matter what. So, here we go.
That's not true. That's not true.
Oh, it is, though. I know it is. You can't lie to me, Richard.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
No, I've got it under control.
I'm sure you do. Okay, so no, what I'm thinking is, I guess my understanding is, and after reading Joanne Bozeman's Singing Through Change, just kind of seeing how the hormones affect the voice and can often deepen the voice. And I associate a bigger voice with, or like a thicker instrument, I should say, with a bigger voice, and a smaller instrument with a tiny voice. Okay. Because I've kind of perceived myself as having a tiny voice. I mean, listen to me talk. It's like this big, So I feel like my voice is definitely deeper. I can hit a lot lower notes. I mean, I often sing down to a low C with my students, but again, not like in music, but I can vocalize down there. But I feel like my voice is just deeper than it used to be before I had kids. Even if I go back, like I had a lesson with Dean back in college, and I was singing Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, and it went down to an F sharp, and he's like, oh, that's too low for you. And even a few years ago when I was doing some recording for him, he's like, well, never mind that key's too low. I'm like, I know what you're talking about. This feels great to me. But he felt like it was too low for me. So I don't know, just timbre wise. But I definitely feel like my voice is lower now than it used to be. But that doesn't mean that I can't still sing as high or almost as high as I used to as a young girl, obviously, because you got me to go really, really high. Does that make any sense?
It does.
That was a very serious answer.
So I know. No, it does. So here's the thing. So the idea, I think you said, right, so you sort of associate, you said tiny voices with a tiny instrument and a big voice with a big instrument, right? So
Yeah.
the language there is interesting in that people who maybe, and maybe some of the voice teachers who are listening, is anybody there? Hello? Is anybody? Okay. Um, the thing is, what makes what we call the bigness of a voice, right, or the tininess of a voice? So this is complex, right? So without getting overly complex, I just want to say, so let's just, if we dealt with female voices, let's say a dramatic soprano versus a lyric coloratura, right? It's not the instrument per se that's larger. So the larynx isn't larger. The tissue isn't necessarily denser or thicker. The question really is, what happens is it has to do with what is the strength of the signal, of the sound signal that is put into the vocal tract by the vocal folds. Now, the strength of that signal is, in short, it has to do with, as the vocal folds oscillate right back and forth doing this, their ability to hold, to get this sort of transglottal pressure. You end up with pressure underneath the folds, then they blow apart, right? And we refer to subglottic pressure, which is kind of a nice thing for us to focus on. But remember, the subglottic pressure is quite fleeting, right? Because it's like subglottic gone, subglottic pressure, it's gone very fast. So it's like pressure, flow, pressure, flow, pressure, flow. So really what matters is every time the vocal folds come together, you have sort of a pressure increase below the folds and a drop in pressure above the folds, a sort of transglottal pressure difference, right? Which Dr. Tietze talks about in his 1994 book, and other people talk about. But it's the drop in the pressure above the vocal folds that is the sound wave. So that's what creates that sort of vavoosh. There goes your sound wave. So what people perceive as a size of a voice has to do with the amplitude of that size, that sound wave, right? So was it this voom voom voom, or was it voom voom? So it was, was it ah 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 ah? What are these? The amplitude has to do with how successful, if you will, you were at sort of momentarily holding back the air to give you that strong sound wave impulse. That's number one. So that has to do, that the size of the voice has to do with that more than anything else.
Is there anything physically that like encourages that to happen, or how much?
Well, so this is an interesting thing, right? So you have the sort of the respiratory mechanism, right? The built-in elasticity of the respiratory mechanism, the ability to get that air moving. Then everybody's vocal folds are different. There's this combination of muscle, cartilage, elasticity is a biggie, right? If the vocal folds are sort of really, it depends on how flexible they are or how stiff they are, the folds themselves, and what this impulse is. There's a lot about this we don't understand. So this is sort of theoretical understanding. So certainly we understand the basics of it. For example, the male instrument, the larynx is larger. There's more mass to the vocal fold tissue, so therefore it oscillates at a lower frequency. So if these are male vocal folds, full tissue, and let's say the female tissue was not as dense, so it was like that, right? So you could do this more frequently than you can do this, because to do this takes longer than to do this, right? So this is higher frequency than this. So ergo, we end up with, say, the female voice is higher frequency in general than the male voice because of the size of the instrument, the density of the vocal fold tissue, etc. But you can have a male voice that's relatively weak compared to a very strong female voice, right? So what I wanted to tie back to was Joanne's book and the hormones, which of course is a very interesting topic. But what one has to keep mindful of is, in addition to the hormones, you also just have general aging issues, which are basically not quantifiable. But what you would be looking at, for example, and this is why you feel your voice is lower, Amy, and all females would say, now some females, for example, cigarettes and alcohol will lower the voice 1, 2, 3, because they will thicken the tissue, and there you go. But as you age, your larynx starts to sit lower in the neck, which means the overall tube or the vocal tract gets longer. And because of that, you start to the resonances, the frequency, resonant frequencies drop. So that changes things too. But really what changes here is the mechanics of the vocal fold tissue. And that has a hormonal aspect to it, for sure. But it's very hard to unpack that from general aging issues, as well as from, for example, other medications that people tend to be on as they age in their late 40s and 50s, which includes everything from antihistamines to blood pressure medication to glucose monitoring, all these different medications that people might end up on. But there's just, even if they're not on that, again, we still have general aging issues. And an important point that I like to make about aging is this, is that the developmental processes of the human body continue up until about the ages of 22, 23, 24. And then there's a little period of plateau where sort of a status quo for a few years. And then the process of aging begins in earnest. So for most people by their late 20s, certainly early 30s, the aging process has begun. And by the time you get to the mid 40s, the aging process is very, very well underway and has definitely made its impact known. This is why, for example, in the classical voice realm, most classical voice singers are retired in their mid 40s. Anyway, so I think those issues are interesting about the hormones and stuff, but there is general aging stuff. But I think a lot of it can be maintained with good vocal technique.
I do have a question. In your career, what's like one thing that you think was the most impactful on getting you to where you are now?
That is tough because there's, boy, I mean, it's a great question, but it's tough. So can I say a couple things? Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to say a couple things. I'm taking a couple things. So my college voice teacher, Valerie Goodall taught me about joy, taught me how to be joyful as a person, as a teacher, as a singer. And I think that's worth $1 million. And I think it's worth $1 million to give your students. You know what I mean? Valerie was like, she was very into, she was a Bert Coffin acolyte and had done her master's degree with him at Colorado. So we used the whole chromatic vowel chart was our technical guide. But at the end of the day, Valerie Goodall was like, you go, you get out, go, 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 go. And I'd get out there and I'd sing my head off and she'd be like this, woohoo! You know, I mean, and to this day, Valerie Goodall's 86 years old and living in Colorado and one of my dearest mentors in the whole world. And she taught me how to be funny and joyful and have that. So I think that's amazing. Orrin Brown at Juilliard taught me so much about the value of the light mechanism, incorporating the light mechanism. So that's a major. And if I were to pick another couple, I mean, Don Miller, Donald Gray Miller of Resonance and Singing was a major mentor of mine who brought me into speech science and asked me to organize the first singing voice science workshop and just gave me this incredible, he saw it in me, tried to get it off the ground for 20 years and couldn't get anybody, saw in me the ability to do it and hooked me up with Steve Osting out at Montclair State and was like, do you think you could work with Osting and pull this off? And I said, yeah, and we did. And, you know, and here 10 years later, there's this Singing Voice Science is now its own freestanding company and the workshop's just a part of it. And so there's all these different, and then Doug Whalen, who's my advisor at CUNY, who just really took me under his wing as a major scientist and linguist. And so for me, that's a tough one to answer for just one. And it would be very tough for me to pick one of those over. I mean, if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with Valerie Goodall and the Joy, because I think if you have that, you can figure out a lot of other stuff. But those other things are so important to who I am.
Cool.
You know,
could you tell us a little bit about the Singing Voice Science workshop and when the next one is coming on for anyone who might be interested?
So you can go to singingvoicescience.com, singingvoicescience.com. So that is now an online educational company, basically, that as soon as I finish this dissertation and can kind of get myself together, it's going to have different elements to it, lectures and courses and guest lecturers and some individual events, some course things, a thing that I'm developing called PhD Homeschool, which is where we would review research papers. Pick a research paper, everybody reads it. I would sort of do an outline with people, maybe have the author come on, maybe 2 or 3 sessions on a research paper and teach everybody how to be really critical in the reading of a research paper and not think, oh my gosh, it's amazing because it's in this journal. It's like, let's just look at it carefully and fair-mindedly and see what the question was and see if we think they successfully answered the question and if the answers they came up with seem reasonable, as opposed to overstated or something of that sort. or they said they didn't have something, but I think they did have something. Sometimes you see that there's something in the data. You're like, I actually think they had something right over here that they seem to have missed, but they were after this other thing, so they missed it. So then the Singing Voice Science Workshop, it's called Donald Gray Miller's Singing Voice Science Workshop. So the workshop is named after Don Miller. It's been named after him for the last 3 years. So it's technically supposed to be at Columbia University. That is our new physical home. We were at Montclair State University for years, and faculty changes and people leaving and retiring and moving made the move, a smart move to Columbia. Gene Goffey-Finn, who's at Teachers College Columbia, is a good friend of mine. We taught at AMDA together 30 years ago. So we're sort of simpatico on these different ideas and things. So it's June 7th to 9th of 2023. The workshop works beautifully online. People have taken it. Sam, you've taken it multiple times.
2 years.
And the science thing is also amazing on the computer because people are right up front. They can see it. It's actually easier than when you're in a big lecture hall with 75 people and the screen is 40 feet away and you're like, what? Where's the harmonic? I don't see it. What do you mean the second what? The resonance, the form? What's a formant? The forming what? So it's much easier, I think, when people see it on screen. They have a really good shot at it. So so they can go to singingvoicescience.com. You can just become a member. It's no charge to become a member. You can join the email list, and we don't blanket you with emails. We do not send out thousands and thousands of emails. I'm very careful about that. We just, when we have something to announce, we announce it, and maybe there's a couple announcements about it, and that's the end of it. We don't bang people over the head 3 times a week. It's like God help you if you give $5 to somebody's political campaign. They give your email and your phone number to everybody from here to Guatemala, and you will be. Have you tried it? Try it. Give $5 to somebody, and you are going to get 50,000 emails and text messages, right? So that will not happen with Singing Voice Science.
Are there any videos available right now? Any recordings of
right now? We call the 8. There's a series of 8 lectures that they serve often as pre-workshop lectures, but they're general lectures on anatomy, physiology, acoustics. There's a separate one on Voce Vista, introduction to Voce Vista. There'll be more of that stuff, more and more content as we get up and running. But I'm also redoing richardlissemore.com, my other website. That Singing Voice Science was redone. That whole business was reimagined the last year and a half. No wonder I can't finish my dissertation. And then richardlissemore.com is in the throes of, I should have shown you, I should have brought up I have a new logo and everything.
Oh, we'll send it to us. Maybe we can
it's like my name's in it. My name's in it too.
Your name?
Yeah, I know. I was going to use yours, Amy, but I thought that would be rude.
Yeah.
He respects you too much.
Yeah, I do. So much. I have a lot of respect for you.
People can also see the recording of the 2018 IVTOM conference where you teach Amy if they go to ivtom.org/events.
Oh my God, even I want to do that.
Yeah, it's there.
You can watch yourself teach all your lectures.
I want to go back I want to hear your high G, your G6.
I need to go back and listen to it. It's been a while.
Something like that, right?
Yeah. That was it.
That was it. What's the difference between a 4 and a 6? What's the difference?
It's fine. 2 sizes.
They're all numbers.
2 sizes. Exactly. No size shaming.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, thank you
This
for
was so
having me.
fun.
It was a pleasure.
Loved it.
Thank you for listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by IVTOM, International Voice Teachers of Mix. Your co-hosts are Sam Johnson and Amy Geddes. Learn more about IVTOM at ivtom.org and find Sam Johnson at vocalese.net and Amy Geddes at breakthrough-studios.com. Voiceover and theme song by Maz Mazak, and this podcast is edited by Amber. You have been listening to
The Voice Teacher Podcast.